When Emeka returned from his journey unannounced, he expected to be welcomed with love. Instead, he met a silence that would break any father's heart. The laughter of children that once filled his home had turned into faint cries, and the warmth of a wife's embrace was nowhere to be found. He stood at the doorway, unsure if he had stepped into his own house or a stranger's. He had left with the hope of providing for his family, but what he came back to was a reality no man should ever face. 3 little lives depending on a mother's care, left on their own as if they were nothing. But what kind of mother abandons her own children? What could drive a woman to walk away from the very ones she brought into the world? Emeka was a man known for his strength and kindness. In his village, people spoke of him as a hardworking father who never allowed his hands to rest until his children had enough to eat. Life had not always been fair to him. He had buried his first wife after a sudden illness, and though the pain nearly broke him, he chose to keep living for his children. When the whispers grew that a man could not raise children alone, Emeka bowed to the advice of elders and took another wife. Her name was Ngozi. She was young, strikingly beautiful, and full of charm that captured the eyes of many men before Emeka made her his bride. In her smile, he hoped to find healing. In her arms, he prayed his children would find a mother's care again. The triplets, 3 tiny blessings born together, were the joy of Emeka's life. 2 boys and 1 girl, playful, innocent, and full of laughter that echoed through the compound. To Emeka, their laughter was music, to others, it was proof that his house was blessed. Their home sat on the edge of a quiet town. A cluster of mud-walled houses with zinc roofs that rattled whenever the wind blew. Neighbors lived close enough that the cry of a child in one compound could be heard in the next. In the evenings, children chased one another down the dusty road while elders gathered under the shade of the old Iroko tree to tell stories of the past. It was in this place that Emeka believed love would grow again. But not all seeds planted in the soil of marriage take root. For while Emeka worked tirelessly to provide, a restlessness began to stir in Ngozi's heart. She was beautiful, yes, but beauty alone does not make a woman content. She was admired by many, and sometimes admiration can be poison when it is allowed to grow unchecked. After the death of his first wife, Emeka lived as a shadow of himself. He woke each morning, looked at the faces of his children, and wondered how he would manage to raise them alone. The triplets were still small, their cries endless, their needs countless. His mother was too old to carry such a burden, and his sisters had their own families. The weight pressed on him until he bowed to the words of elders, a house without a woman is a house without peace. And so he agreed to marry again. That was how Ngozi entered his life. She was everything a man could hope for in appearance, graceful, lively, with eyes that carried a spark of youth. When she walked through the market, people turned their heads. When she smiled at Emeka, it was as though a part of his broken heart began to heal. The first months of their marriage were filled with hope. Neighbors whispered that Emeka had finally found joy again. The children clung to her skirts, and she led them, laughing lightly as if she was ready to love them as her own. Emeka, grateful for her presence, worked harder than ever, determined to give her the life she deserved. But joy can sometimes be short-lived. For while Emeka left home each morning to labor in the fields, Ngozi remained with the triplets. At first, she carried her role with a smile, but soon the laughter faded. The cries of 3 restless children filled her ears until her beauty was clouded with weariness. She was young, still eager for freedom, and often gazed out of the compound as though life beyond those walls called to her. Whispers began to creep into her heart, why should I spend my days washing, cooking, and chasing after children that are not even mine by blood? The admiration she once enjoyed from men in the market did not stop, in fact, it grew. And each time she returned from an errand, her eyes shone with a restlessness that Emeka could not see, for he was too busy struggling to provide. He believed he had given her everything, a home, respect, and children who called her mother. But discontent is like smoke, it seeps into the smallest cracks until it fills a room. And while Emeka trusted in her silence, while he left each morning thinking his house was safe, Ngozi's heart was slowly drifting. But Emeka had no idea what his wife was planning. After weeks of working far away, Emeka decided to return home without sending word ahead. He imagined the look of surprise on his wife's face, the joyful cries of his children rushing into his arms. His heart was light as he walked the familiar dusty road that led to his compound. He thought of the food they would share, the laughter that would follow, and the comfort of family after long days of labor. But as he approached the house, something felt strange. The compound, usually alive with noise, was silent. Too silent. Even the goats tied near the fence bleated as though restless, their sounds echoing against the stillness. Emeka stepped closer. The wooden door was half open, swaying gently as if pushed by a careless hand. His brow tightened. Ngozi had always kept the door shut whenever he traveled, but now it hung wide like a mouth that refused to keep secrets. Inside, the air was heavy with neglect. Pots sat unwashed, their contents long dried and smelling of rot. Clothes were scattered on the floor, dust gathering in corners. This was not the home he left behind. Then, faintly, he heard it, the weak, broken cries of children. At first he thought his ears deceived him, but as he moved deeper into the room, the sound grew clearer. He pushed open the inner door and froze. There, on a rough mat, lay his triplets. Their faces streaked with tears, their clothes damp, their small hands reaching weakly as if begging for the touch of a mother who never came. Their cries were no longer strong, but thin and fading, the kind of sound that pierces a father's soul. Emeka rushed to them, his chest tightening with fear. He looked around, but Ngozi was nowhere to be found. No sign of food, no sign of care. Only 3 helpless children abandoned, their bellies empty, their eyes dull from hunger. He gathered them into his arms, and in that moment the truth struck him harder than any blow. They had been left alone. Not for hours, but for days. His heart shook with anger, with pain, with questions that had no answers. Where was Ngozi? What could have driven her to leave 3 innocent children to suffer in silence? Emeka held his children close, his heart pounding with fear and anger. He tried to hush their cries, rocking them gently, but he could see the hollowness in their faces. Their lips were dry, their eyes half closed. Days of hunger had stolen the joy that once filled their spirits. No father should ever witness such a sight. He placed them carefully back on the mat, covering them with his wrapper, and stepped outside. His eyes scanned the compound. No footprints, no fresh water at the clay pot, no sign of cooking smoke rising into the sky. Ngozi had not only left them, she had vanished. Emeka's mind raced. He thought of the marketplace, of her friends, of the men who once admired her beauty. Could she be with one of them? Could she have walked away so easily from her vows, from the children who called her mother? He asked neighbors if they had seen her, but they shook their heads. Some avoided his eyes, uneasy with the shame they already suspected. Whispers began to move from mouth to mouth. How could a woman leave triplets alone? Where could she have gone? As the sun sank lower, Emeka's anger grew. He could not understand. Was it poverty? Was it pride? Or was it the restlessness he had noticed in her eyes, the longing for freedom she never spoke aloud? By the second day of his return, he found her. Ngozi walked into the compound as though nothing was wrong. Dressed neatly, her hair tied with care, her face carrying no trace of guilt. She looked at Emeka, then at the children, and sighed as if they were nothing but a burden she had been forced to carry. Emeka's voice shook as he asked her, "Where have you been? Do you know what I came home to? Do you know what I found?" She looked away, her silence sharper than any words. And when she finally spoke, her voice was cold. She said the children were too much for her. That she was too young to be tied down. That she could not waste her life buried in the cries of children that were not her own flesh and blood. Her words cut through Emeka's heart like a blade. He had given her a home, respect, love, and in return she had given him abandonment. But Ngozi was about to learn that every action carries a consequence. News travels fast in a small town. By the next morning, whispers had spread beyond Emeka's compound. Women at the stream shook their heads in disbelief, men at the market muttered about shame, and children repeated what they had overheard from their parents. Ngozi left the triplets alone, some said. She was never ready to be a mother, others added. Everywhere, her name was spoken, not with admiration, but with scorn. Emeka's relatives came quickly. His elder sister wept when she saw the condition of the children. His mother, weak with age, sat in silence, her hands trembling as she stroked the little girl's hair. It was too much for a family already scarred by loss. The elders of the village called a meeting. They gathered under the old Iroko tree, where matters of grave importance were always discussed. Men and women sat in a circle, their eyes fixed on Ngozi as she stood before them. One of the oldest men cleared his throat and spoke, "Ngozi, is it true that you abandoned these children? Did you leave them to hunger while you sought your own pleasure?" Ngozi shifted uneasily but did not bow her head. She said she was tired. She said she never asked to mother triplets. She said she deserved freedom, that Emeka should have known better than to burden her with such responsibility. A heavy murmur rose from the crowd. Mothers gasped, fathers shook their heads. One woman cried out, "Children are not a burden. They are a gift. Even if they are not yours by birth, they are yours by love." The chief elder raised his hand for silence. His voice was stern when he spoke. "A woman who abandons her children abandons her own soul. You have shamed your husband, you have shamed this town, and worst of all, you have shamed motherhood itself." All eyes turned back to Emeka. His face was lined with pain, but his voice was steady. He told them he had married Ngozi in good faith, that he had trusted her with the most precious part of his life, and she had thrown it away. The council agreed that such an act could not go unanswered. Ngozi's actions had brought disgrace, and disgrace must be met with truth. Her beauty, once her pride, could no longer protect her from the judgment of her people. But the greatest punishment was not the words of the elders, nor the whispers of the neighbors. The greatest punishment was yet to come, and it would come from within. Ngozi stood before the elders, defiant at first, but the longer the silence stretched, the more her confidence began to fade. The words of the chief elder echoed around her like a drumbeat she could not silence. Every face in the crowd told her what she did not want to admit: she had crossed a line no wife, no mother, should ever cross. When she tried to defend herself again, her voice cracked. She said she was young, she said she was overwhelmed, she said no one understood her. But even as she spoke, her words sounded hollow. Mothers in the crowd shook their heads, some with tears in their eyes. They too had known the exhaustion of raising children, but none had chosen abandonment. Emeka did not shout. He did not curse her. His quiet gaze was heavier than any insult. He simply looked at the triplets, their frail bodies recovering slowly in the arms of his sister, and then back at Ngozi. That look told her she had lost something far more valuable than beauty, far more precious than freedom. She had lost the trust of the only man who gave her a chance at love after tragedy. The council passed its judgment. Ngozi would no longer be welcome in Emeka's house. Her place as wife and mother was gone. She was told to return to her father's compound in shame. In a society where family honor was everything, this was a wound that could not be hidden. As she walked away from the gathering, whispers followed her like shadows. The same lips that once praised her beauty now spoke of her selfishness. The same eyes that once admired her turned away in disgust. But perhaps the harshest punishment was not from the community. It was the quiet moments that came later, when she sat alone in her father's hut. The echoes of the children's cries returned to her ears. The image of their small hands reaching out, begging for comfort, refused to leave her mind. And in those moments of silence, when no one else was watching, she began to realize that the burden she had tried to escape had turned into a wound she could never heal. Life slowly returned to Emeka's home. With the help of his sister and neighbors, the triplets regained their strength. Their cries turned once again into laughter, though softer than before, touched by the pain of what they had endured. Emeka watched them closely, every smile a reminder of how fragile joy can be, every step a silent vow that he would never let them suffer again. He worked harder than ever, but this time he did not carry the burden alone. His family stood by him, and the community, ashamed of Ngozi's actions, offered their support. Food was brought, hands were extended, and for the first time in many years, Emeka felt that he was not fighting life's battles by himself. In the evenings, when the sun dipped behind the hills, Emeka would sit outside with his children gathered around him. He told them stories of their late mother, of her kindness, of the sacrifices she made, and he reminded them that true love is never measured by words, but by actions. The triplets grew, not with bitterness, but with strength. They learned early that life could be harsh, but they also learned that a father's love, steady and unwavering, can shield even the smallest hearts from despair. And though Ngozi's name was still spoken, it was no longer with admiration. Her story became a warning, a lesson parents told their children by firelight, that beauty fades, but character remains. That selfishness destroys, but sacrifice builds. This story reminds us that children are not burdens, they are blessings. That marriage is not sustained by charm or appearance, but by patience, endurance, and love that does not run away when tested. It reminds us that responsibility is heavier than beauty, and those who run from it often run into shame. Above all, it reminds us that no matter how difficult life may be, the hands of a parent must never let go of the children who depend on them. For when a mother or father abandons their child, they abandon their very heart. And so, Emeka's story ends not with despair, but with strength. A father who chose to stand, children who found hope again, and a wife who walked away from her blessings only to discover the emptiness of her choice. But let me ask you, what would you have done if you were in Emeka's shoes? Could you ever forgive a spouse who abandoned your children? Do you believe Ngozi deserved another chance, or was the judgment of the community fair? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters, and your perspective may carry a lesson for someone else. If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe for more powerful African stories, stories that teach, stories that heal, and stories that remind us that every action carries a consequence. Until next time, remember this: true love is proven not in what we say, but in what we choose to do.